Ted Lasso as really a lens to start having conversations about leadership, and it opens up a vocabulary, a vernacular and just a collection of phrases that you can use to connect with people. And that's the great thing about Ted Lasso, and that's what we really enjoyed. And our administrators were telling us that they wanted to talk to each other, and this gave us an opportunity to do.
Well, I did it. I finally completed every single province now represented in the CanadianEd Leadership Show. And it took a while, but I finally did it. And today we have two. Figured better than, leaving it to now, we might as well at least have two guests from Newfoundland schools. Ryan Kelley and Stephen Perchard are director of schools for various families. So just for broad context, Newfoundland schools is largely one school district, and each of these directors essentially serve somewhat like superintendents would be in other provinces and smaller, but they are called family of schools, but they all kind of work under one umbrella. And I got to meet Stephen and Ryan in Newfoundland, actually, this summer when I presented at CASA. And I saw their title of their presentation was on how Ted Lasso helps them as school leaders, and using a lot of the framing and insights from that particular show. And those of you that know that show, well, maybe just nod your head and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I get it. And so we actually just kind of crossed paths in the hallways. Our sessions actually, one of our sessions actually conflicted. So I never got to see them present, which was, I said, well, in lieu of that, I said, you need to come on the podcast. And they were quite happy to do so. So in today's conversation, we discussed that particular model that they're using and kind of the impact it has. I think school leaders will find that really interesting, just as well, sort of better understanding the Newfoundland context. And so this was just, again, a delight to have these two gentlemen on my show, sharing all the things happening in Newfoundland and their approach to leadership, which I think you'll find very fascinating. So today, enjoy my conversation today with Stephen and Ryan from Newfoundland schools. The first thing we were trying to figure out is what time is it in Newfoundland? That's always a really good quiz. It'll test your Canadian skills and our time zone skills. Great to be with you guys this morning and this afternoon, wherever we are today. But Stephen and Ryan, I would love it if you maybe just, I think there's a couple things I want to start with. One, just give you guys an introduction of your own sort of self and where you are in the world. Then I want to talk a little bit about the sort of the brief history, if you will, and or context of Newfoundland education. As everyone knows, I'm so excited to have my first guest from Newfoundland on the show, and this kind of completes the scope of the country.
My name is Ryan Kelley. I'm a director of schools. I'm part of a team of directors here in Newfoundland and Labrador that oversee family schools, and I have 29 schools in my family. So mine is actually family schools 4.
I'm Steve Perchard. I'm family of schools 3. Geographically, I'm slightly closer to Udine by about a couple hundred kilometers, maybe. So I oversee schools, or serve schools, I should say, on the southwest coast of Newfoundland, Labrador, Stephenville, Port aux Basques, those areas. And I 25 schools is what I serve.
So yeah, thanks guys. And I'm learning a little bit more and probably have more context than most people, but just kind of give people a brief history of how Newfoundland got to where it is, because I remember back 25 years ago, as I was entering in the early stages of my career, understanding how Newfoundland was like a lot of provinces where it was very small little pockets working as individual districts. And so things changed over the years. Give us sort of a brief history of where you came from and where you are now.
Steve, I think it's probably best you take this one. I think you've been around a little longer than I have.
It's an age joke, yeah. So Ryan doesn't remember some of the details that I lived through, I guess. So originally, I guess, go back to the mid-90s, there were, I believe, 28 separate school districts across Newfoundland, Labrador. And all of those school districts were denominational. So they were by religion. So I think if you're looking at our history, the church and schools were really integrated up until about 1997. I believe at the time there was a referendum, a provincial referendum, where denominations were taken out of the school system. And I believe it was the 98-99 school year. We went down from 28 school districts that were denominational in focus to 10 school districts that were, I guess, the religious context was removed from those districts at that time. I started teaching in 2000. So I came in at that point when there were 10 districts provincially and started working in Corner Brook. It was the Corner Brook, Humber, St. Barb district, I think is what it was called at the time. Worked under that structure for about 3 years, and around 2004, I believe, under the Danny Williams government, those 10 districts were consolidated down to 4 districts: Eastern, Central, Western, and Labrador. And they existed for about 10 years in that structure. And around 2013, those 4 districts were amalgamated into one district, the Newfoundland Labrador English School District. So that was 2013, I should say. And we existed for about 10 years in that structure. And I think that's how I met Ryan. And we started in these roles under NLESD. And it was January of 2024 where NLESD was actually amalgamated into the Department of Education under what's now known as NL Schools. So up until January 2024, I guess the Department of Education existed separate of the school district. And January 2024, we all came together under one, I shouldn't say one umbrella. There's still 6 different branches, I believe,
Sure.
of the Department of Education. But we came into the Department of Education under the NL Schools umbrella. I should say as well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we also have a separate Francophone school district as well that has always existed alongside of all of those amalgamations and structures that I just talked about.
And now, would this be modeled after the Nova Scotia example as well? Like, how are you, like, because Nova Scotia have gone to regions, but their big sort of push there is they've eliminated school boards, school trustees.
Yeah, the trustee system that we had, that did dissolve when we became NL Schools. I can't say for sure if it was modeled after the Nova Scotia system or whatnot. I imagine that there were jurisdictional scans that were done nationally, and bits and pieces were probably borrowed when we became NL Schools. Ron, I don't know if you know anything more specific about.
Is that then? Did that dissolve come in 2024 or 2013?
No, the trustees existed up until around 2023, I believe, just before the amalgamation of us into government. That's when the trustees were, I guess, dissolved.
I mean, I asked that question because right now in Ontario, it's a highly charged political hub of Canada, and there's been a lot of interference, interaction, however you want to describe it, with the government and school boards, essentially, quote unquote, taking over school boards and removing the trustees from it. And there's a talk of eliminating that. And just from a operational system, and I'm not sure if you can kind of juxtapose the before and the after piece with that, but like, how has that impacted not only your role, but just really schools, kids in general, that shift of, because those are one of those things, if you're a kid in school, you could care less about all the stuff you just talked about. It doesn't matter to you. I just go to that school. That's all I care about. That's all I want to know. But, you obviously see both those sides of it. I just wonder if you have any reflection on sort of those changes and how that's been for the better, for the worse. And you can only speak for your experience, but I'd love to kind of hear what your thoughts are on that.
And I can jump in here just for a second. There is a lot of hope in what we've done, just from the instance of now being able to work with people that we typically didn't work with. So, our curriculum implementers and our curriculum developers are now really on the same page. So that does help us. And there's a lot of hope in the work we've been doing. And in terms of our schools, we are still very much, we have 10 families of schools. We work together on some. Steve and I actually, Steve being Family Schools 3, myself being Family Schools 4, we have a little bit of a joke for our administrators to say that we're Family Schools 3/4 because we work so closely together. But yeah, we do have some autonomy in the work that we do in our family of schools.
Yeah, I go back to your question, Dean, as well. I think if you're a student in the classroom, they don't care about the trustees, the organizational structure. I would like to think our students are probably largely unaware of the change. I'll go back to when we were in LESD. We had a very students-focused emphasis on education. That has not got away in terms of our amalgamation in government. I think when I'm working with my principals, and Orion's the same when he's working with his principals, I like to think the day-to-day work hasn't changed. There's a very much focus on students, very much focus on student engagement, focus on the development of the entire child and that social, emotional development. I think that's still there. So I think the day-to-day operations piece, I really haven't seen a change.
And I mean, it seems to me, and this is, I think, true from what I know in Nova Scotia, is that you're obviously, Ryan, you kind of alluded to the fact that your relationship with the ministry is a lot closer than it would be, because it has to be, right? Like and whereas I know in other provinces, there's a bit of a gap, and sometimes school boards kind of do their own thing in hopes that the ministry just doesn't bother them, if you will. So again, and I think too, it speaks to the ethos of Newfoundland in general, that sort of community feel, that really focus on the relationships is really a priority, and it is kind of leans into the strength of the province, just the way you guys kind of operate. I don't know if that's a fair assessment.
I think we did a little bit of research yesterday, just preparing for this and looking at British Columbia as an example. I think 60 something school districts there. Quebec, I forget the number, fairly high. So some provinces with 60, 70, 80 school districts. The fact that we're all together under one umbrella, there's a potential for a common vision. There's potential for common goals, and for us to be working collaboratively. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that. We're still very early into the integration process. We've been there about a year and a half, but these things do take time. But being around different tables or having different conversations with people that normally wouldn't be there, I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity for where we are and where we're heading as a province.
And again, in my conversation with folks in Nova Scotia, trying to fill that gap of, all right, so we don't have school boards anymore. How do we maintain that idea of having a connection back to the community? So it's in the building up of parent advisory groups or whatever that may be. And so I'm sure all of those things are part of the conversation around when you make a change, you don't want to lose the things that were good in the previous iterations, and you want to kind of lean into what the opportunities are as you've kind of described it. Anyway, I didn't want to go too deep into this, but that was kind of just, I think it helps set the stage for people to know what makes Newfoundland education different from other places. That's obviously structurally one thing. But now let's talk a little bit about just the way teaching and learning happens. I wanted to talk a little bit about, because we both met earlier this summer at CASA, and you were doing this amazing presentation. Unfortunately, it was exactly the same time as I was doing a presentation, so I was unable to kind of get the gist of your focus. And Ted Lasso has been a bit of a cult following in the last few years, just in terms of kind of the energy and the positivity that his slightly unorthodox style of coaching brings to it. But you kind of leaned into that. So give us the high level look at that, not just the presentation, but really at what that means is in terms of your leadership in your respective areas?
I think it's probably best if we tell the story. Steve and I actually attended ULEAD in Banff in 2023, and we met an administrator in the lunch line who said that he was doing some work with Ted Lasso. Steve had seen a couple episodes on the plane, and after talking with that individual, we said, this is something that we could do, and we would take it into a little bit of a different context and more of a systems approach. So we actually did a 10-week study, a TV study with our administrators, starting with our own and then into administrators right across the province. And with Ted Lasso as really a lens to start having conversations about leadership, and it opens up a vocabulary, a vernacular and just a collection of phrases that you can use to connect with people. And that's the great thing about Ted Lasso, and that's what we really enjoyed. And our administrators were telling us that they wanted to talk to each other, and this gave us an opportunity to do.
Dean, have you seen Ted Lasso? I need to ask. I think this is important. The
Yes, I
entire
have.
series?
I haven't. I think I've done up to season 2, end of season 2.
So I think what's brilliant about the show, we won't spoil anything for anyone who's listening to this that hasn't watched it, other than I think we really need to emphasize, if you're working in leadership, if you're working in education, it's such a powerful show, and there's so many great moments in there. And myself and Ryan don't receive any commission from any Apple TV purchases or anything like that, but really do recommend that people watch it. I think, what myself and Ryan were noticing in terms of talking to our administrators, let's face it, we've just come off the pandemic. People were tired during the pandemic. There's been a lot of challenges, I think, nationally in terms of student engagement, kids back in class, teachers feeling overworked. Without being negative, we were noticing there was a lot of pressure and a lot of stress in the system. And people, I think, teachers were really looking for things they could be positive about, things they could be hopeful about, and ways that we could reframe the challenges that are in front of us. Because let's face it, as educators, no matter where you work, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, if you're a systems leader, you're dealing with stress. This really gives a vehicle, I think, to reframe some of those obstacles into positive moments. And I think myself and Ryan both believe there's real power that if you face things with the glass is half full versus the glass is half empty, you're more likely to get through the obstacles that are there. And we've seen that in our work, and we've seen that the effect that has had with the principals that we've worked with.
No, I'm really curious about it, just because I think I've lately been, I guess, struck, and all the work that I've been doing with AI, I'm very open to the fact that AI brings with tremendous challenges and a lot of risks and a lot of things for us to be worried about. But how do I balance that with the fact that there is hope, right? Because I feel like our young people today are growing up in a world that's telling them we're doomed, right? Whether it's climate change, whether it's economics, whether it's politics, whether it's AI, all of these things, right? There's a heavy dose of this is all going to go sour on us if we don't get our act together, which I'm not saying that there's not truth to that concern, and thinking people understand. Yeah, there's some tough times on us now and ahead. However, I feel like in education with young people, we have to, I wouldn't even just say balance it, but I think we have to overemphasize the hope and the possibilities for them. Because if they're indeed the ones that are going to help drive our next generation, bringing them down constantly with like, it's not looking good. Like, kids are struggling so much today. So I would be just curious to hear, even Ryan, you talked a little bit about the appetite that your administrators seem to have towards us. Just share a little bit more about things you've seen already with some of these conversations that sort of speak to this idea that, hey, things are changing, things are people are bringing a different energy to what they do. If you've got any anecdotes or stories to share.
Definitely. I'm glad you asked that question. So even and I'm sorry, Steve, I'm going to have to ruin a little bit of Ted Lasso. I'll try to stick to the first couple of episodes, but in one of the scenes, Ted gives out just a box for suggestions of how he can improve the clubhouse early in his tenure as a manager. And in those suggestions, there's one that he pulls out that says the shower pressure is rubbish. So in just going through the TV study with one of my administrators, he called me up one day and he said, "Ryan, I've got a shower pressure issue." But in the show, that is a small change that has a big impact on your school. So when I said that it opens up the vocabulary, well, for him, rather than focusing on, I got this big deal now I got to fix, he knew he was able to identify that I have a small little issue that if we take care of it, is going to impact the morale of my staff. So that's one example of a situation where we've been able to connect the Ted Lasso pieces, which is hopeful and it is light, and not of everything we deal with is in that way. And Steve, I'm sure you have tons of
I love
these
that.
examples as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. First of all, I've loved, since we started doing these TV studies, I go visit my principals in different schools, and all of a sudden I'm seeing Ted Lasso memorabilia in their offices, on their walls, or a believe sign over their door. That it's one of those tangible things that you see that principals they're hearing this, they're believing it, and they're buying into it. And based on that, a question that I often ask principals, if they've seen the show, because not all principals had, is what would Ted Lasso do in this situation? So I've had principals call me and they're upset. As we all get in education, they're feeling worn down. A moment's getting to them. Let them rant for a second, let them vent, and then kind of step back and say, okay, we got to fix this. How do we make it positive? What would Ted Lasso do? And when you reframe the question, and now you need to find a positive lens for that, it really does lend itself for a different mode to problem solve. And from that, I've seen principals, when they would have gone home upset and mad and want to quit their jobs, actually get a little bit more reinvigorated and say, okay, I'm ready to deal with this again. So I think those things are powerful moments. They might sound small, but it's those small moments sometimes that really make us impactful in our jobs.
Well, I think about the whole meme culture that we live in. A meme is essentially an inside joke, right? That we know, and that's what kind of brings us together. And that's what you've kind of created here, is a little bit of an inside. Again, it's not exclusive. Anybody could be part of it, but it speaks to something specific. And I also I guess I'm loving the idea that not every professional learning has to be around these highly academic and or serious kind of things. Like we often talk about taking our job serious, but not ourselves so seriously. Like we got to have a little bit of levity in it. And again, I think that is such a counter response to the fact that there's a lot of heaviness in the world that is easy to get wrapped up in. And I know when you say that too, there's people that think, oh, that they're thinking about toxic positivity and the fact that you're just ignoring things. And I know completely you're not ignoring the fact that these are real challenges and these are problems that can be a big deal. But man, it sure makes a difference when you have leaders who don't put everything under, not everything is high priority and high stress. You can't live like that.
Yeah.
And so
Let's talk
Yeah.
about the toxic positivity thing, though, because this
Yeah.
is something myself and Ryan we try to really nail this home when we're in our presentations. We actually have a slide. Adam Grant, I think, developed it. Adam Grant talked about toxic positivity a lot in one of the earlier books. Adam Grant's another person myself and Ryan often talk about in terms of a great author. People should read him. But he talks about toxic positivity and what toxic positivity looks like versus what genuine optimism looks like.
That's
And
right.
We can share a slide with you after. But if you look at the Ted Lasso, think of Ted Lasso and think of the voice that he uses, he talks from the place of genuine optimism. It's not toxic positivity where he's saying to Coach Beard, oh, everything's so good. I can't believe that we're here. They acknowledge their problems in that show. They acknowledge the stresses, the obstacles that are in front of them. But it's now that we know what the barriers are, now the question is, how do we get around that? So I think myself and Ryan are really transparent, as I think all of us directors are here in Newfoundland, Labrador, is we acknowledge that the system isn't perfect. There is stress in our schools. There are problems that we're not just dealing with in Newfoundland and Labrador, but we're dealing with nationally. And I think any school system, if you tell me there's a school system out there without problems, I don't believe you. We know that they're there, right? So we need to acknowledge that the problems are there, but the problems can't be an excuse for not finding a solution. We also need to find a way to work through those obstacles so that we can still do our jobs, still impact kids, and still, it sounds cheesy, but Ted Lasso is kind of cheesy too, still kind of make the world a better place through the work that we do every day. And I think that's why the show and this leadership study is so impactful and so important.
Oh, I love it. And so where are you in this? Are you kind of finished your study of this, or is this going to be is this sort of an ongoing series that you're focusing on?
For us, there's always a new audience. We actually made our TV study to be optional. So we had about 100 administrators through Newfoundland, Labrador. And again, we have a number of other administrators that we could. I do think we're probably going to pivot a little bit and move into more of a just a hopeful leadership stance and be able to bring in others. But Steve and I haven't really talked about that because I think we do still have room to grow, and there is going to be a season 4.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited about it, and anything you guys can share with me, I'm gonna pass along to others as well, because I know there's a lot of Ted Lasso fans, but also just the whole idea of hopeful optimism that allows some hope. Just again, as we try to counter a little bit of what our young people and our adults are experiencing on a daily basis. And when I think about leadership, I'll just pivot a little bit here. One of the things that I think is a priority in not just Canadian leaders, but leaders everywhere, and specifically in education, is that we model the fact that we like our jobs. We like what we're doing because we're not going to be there forever. And so we want to grow leadership as a cultural phenomenon in our thing. So I wonder about, when you think about a leadership challenge that you've faced in your careers, maybe there's one that comes to mind, and even if you can kind of tell me a little bit what you were thinking in terms of how you kind of were going to get through this one, and maybe lessons that you learned. If you've got one in mind, I'd love to hear a leadership challenge that kind of sticks out in your mind. Even if it didn't end up as successfully as you might, there's still learning that happens in there.
I can go first, Steve, if you want.
I think your example is awesome here, Ryan, for this one.
I'll just tell you where it was. And this is not something really new. This is from my time as an administrator. And I've told this story to Steve 100 times before. We were tackling an attendance issue. So we had students that were coming to school, and from the community that I was in, we have a quite a high percentage of workers that fly away every 2 weeks to another province, and roughly about 50% actually in the community I was in. So that means a trip to the airport every 2 weeks for children. I also live in, probably Steve's going to disagree, but the most beautiful part of the province, which means that there's a cabin culture here where our parents and students skip away early on a Friday to go to their cabins. So we need to combat that because we need students in the building. And we did everything from cautionary tales to data in newsletters that had very little impact on students. So with our leadership team, we came up with the idea that we really had to tackle this through students. We had to create a school where kids wanted to be there. School had to be fun. They had to be invested. And again, going back a couple of years, we started a passion project. So it was really about establishing a passion for students, an interest that they could follow, and they had to have a little bit of FOMO. They had to have fear of missing out. So if I missed a Friday afternoon, I was going to miss my opportunity. And I had a staff that was very consistent, and they weren't used to embracing the chaos that this was going to create. It was a really great experience. And I think for the most part, the biggest challenge was having teachers not be the experts. The students became the experts. And then it was a selling point for our educators once they saw what students were able to do when they were passionate. And our attendance took a fairly major uptick because students just wouldn't leave. They wanted to be here. So for me, that's probably the greatest challenge. I've had many challenges in this role as well, but I feel like from what I learned from that is as long as we're giving students a voice and they're going to be excited about learning, we're going to be in a good place.
Oh, I love it. It's a great story. That's a great example. Steve, what about you?
I'll start first by just showing how closely aligned philosophically I think myself and Ryan are. Ryan just talked about embracing chaos. And I told him yesterday, when I did my master's degree, the title of my master's thesis was Embracing Chaos. So again, I think that's the same philosophy that we kind of work with. I took this question a little bit differently, thinking about a leadership challenge. I was thinking about a leadership challenge in my current role, being a director who's serving 25 different principals across the West Coast. And a big challenge for me, Dean, is, and I struggle with it every day, is how do we put the student learning piece in front of the operational piece? And what I mean by that is I think every day I talk to principals about things like busing issues or bell schedules or student assistants aren't showing up or we're short teachers today. And how are we dealing with that? And we get so caught up in the day-to-day operations is how do we find time to carve out time to have those instructional conversations, to be getting into classrooms, be looking at how we are teaching students, engaging students, and assessing students so that at the end of the day, they're coming out being the best individuals, getting the best product from us that we can. So to me, that's the day-to-day challenge. And I think there's a bigger question behind that. Because I don't think this Newfoundland Labrador issue, I think this is more national in scope, is we often, I think principals struggle sometimes with how to have those conversations with their teachers because if you're crossing a personal boundary. If I'm talking to Ryan about how he's running his classroom or what he's doing, I think it's really easy to step on toes, get Ryan a little bit upset, and maybe have that difficult conversation. Whereas if we talk about busing or we talk about we don't have a teacher, no one gets offended by that stuff, right?
Right.
So how do we start having those more intimate conversations about our practice in the classrooms to show, to push students in their learning and create better experiences? So to me, that's the big thing that's always in the back of my mind.
So is there anything, let me push you a little further on that challenge. So is there some strategies or mindsets or things that you are trying to deploy for yourself to prioritize that?
I think Ted Lasso has helped immensely in this, if I can bring it back to that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great, it doesn't ruin anything, but there's a great quote that comes out from Ted Lasso about being curious and not judgmental. And I think I've talked to a lot of I've learned through Ted Lasso that I can have a conversation with my principals or with a teacher saying, let me ask you a question because I'm wondering something. And generally leaning into that with that lens of curiosity. figure out, why do you do things this way? Because if I'm going in saying, I think you should do things differently before I hear their side, I'm being judgmental then. We've got a director we work really closely with. His name's Don Perry. He's retiring this week. I think he's got 3 days left. And one of Don's favorite questions to ask when we're around tables having meetings, he keeps asking, I have a wondering. And just him putting that out there, it stops the conversation and it permits you to bring it in a different direction. It's not confrontational. It's not judgmental. It's born out of pure curiosity. And I think that can be a really impactful way to have those intimate conversations where you can start pushing people in their practice.
It's an invitation, right? You're inviting people to engage, right? And everyone likes an invitation, right? So how can we make more invitations? That's awesome. Ryan, I'm going to get you to go first on this one. So do a little bragging about Family of Schools 4. What are you most proud of with your Family of Schools?
I think it's a culture piece that we're bringing, and I don't think I introduced it before. I do have a very vast geography. Steve does as well. Mine takes in all of Central and, again, a part of Central Western region of Newfoundland. So tying that together, and I do draw a different borderline than others. So I have, like I said, a part of my schools that were always traditionally the West Coast, part of the West Coast in the Western School District. And I have another group that has been traditionally Central. In the integration and bringing our administrators together, finding a culture of teamwork and being able to support each other. I'm lucky enough to have no new administrators for this upcoming school year. But I really do feel that the Lasso work has helped us. And I feel like we're able to look at some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis. And rather than it being like a complex puzzle, we're able to look at each piece individually. That's what I'm proud of, is the administrators that I have and their viewpoint on solving some of the things that we deal with.
All right. This is not to one up them, Stephen, but what are you proud of when you think about Family of Schools 3?
I've been trying to one up Ryan for years. I can't do it, so I realistically, it might sound cheesy again. People I work with, the relationships that are there, in my 25 schools, I think if you count assistant principals, I've got about 43, 44 administrators that I work with on a daily basis. I'm really blown away by their level of dedication to their schools, their care for their school communities, for their teachers, for their students, for their ability to solve problems. And listen, sometimes it's really a pleasure for me to come in. I sit at this desk or I visit a school. A lot of times is they just want to bounce an idea off me or riff on something. But to be able to work with people that are that talented and passionate about what they do. And I should say, to work with the other directors of schools that we work with as well. Really privileged that once a week we get to sit around a table virtually most of the time, but hear what's going on around provincially and then try to unite all of our work provincially. And it's a real pleasure, real joy.
Kind of not surprising that both of you kind of lean into the relationship piece as the ethos that you've already kind of established. And I think about kind of, Ryan, you said you don't have any new Ryan, did you say you had no new administrators this year?
I have no new administrators, so we have a returning group.
Okay, but that doesn't last forever, and sometimes you have to. We need new blood, and lots of things happen, whether it's just retirement or whatever that case. So I think about this idea of how do you actively recruit and or sort of prep for the next generation of leaders. And I guess I just would ask, what advice would you give? Let's say you identify a young teacher. He or she is 26, 27 years old, and you think, man, she would make a great principal, I think. Or it comes to you and says, hey, I'm interested. I'd like to think about this. Like, what advice might you give them as they're trying to think about preparing for, again, we can talk about leadership, doesn't have to be a title for sure, but if they are actually thinking about moving into a different role, what advice would you give them at this stage?
Yeah. So that's probably one of the most beneficial parts of what I do. And it's what I love to do most is when I get into school and being able to identify some of the teachers that are doing extraordinary things with students. I to be able to go in and sit down with some of those teachers, and I can think a lot of them right now. And basically what you said is that you don't need a title. You can lead from wherever you are. If you have a big idea, and I was lucky enough to have good mentors in my past experience, and I entered leadership at a very young period in my career. But that's where it was. I had mentors who pushed me further, and no idea was too big. So really, if you want to do it as a leader, the best advice I could give any leader would be, you're there to take the barriers away. Let your Mavericks run with what they want to run with, and you're there to keep those obstacles out of their way. And yeah, I think for me, it's just allowing those leaders to lead, whether it's in a classroom, and not just leaders as teachers. Our students are doing some fantastic things as well, and they're able to make real change. And so wherever you are, you can be a leader. And that would be
And I love that idea of removing barriers. That, like, how do you do that? What does that look like? Whether you're a teacher doing that for your students, or you're a principal for your teachers, or whomever. That's a great piece of advice. Steve, what's yours? Kind of advice that you lean into?
Yeah, this is reminded of something there when Ryan talked about busy schools and talking to the teachers, for instance, is I've noticed in this role, being a director, sometimes I'll walk into the school and I use the term, like, I change the temperature in a school, all right? Like, I come in, maybe because people think I'm the director, they change their behavior, they're a little more standoffish. For me, like, to get into a school and see a teacher doing great things and have that conversation to say, listen, I love what you're doing. Keep doing it. Be that encouraging voice and really encourage then that leadership potential, because I don't know what you're seeing in your conversations across Canada, but I know here in Newfoundland, we're seeing it in certain geographies. People are more hesitant to step up to leadership roles, and sometimes they need that little bit of a push or a nudge. And I think we have to, in our positions, to be looking at ways to identify talent and saying, you've got some real potential there. And, let's, have you ever thought about this, and how can I help you get there? I think those are great conversations to have. I think one piece of advice I would have to a new administrator is really be bold, be clear on who you are, like, know what your values and vision is, and always keep that in mind. And that will help you in your decision making. And also all of the, I think about this, like, teachers need to use Power School or Review 360 or the finance software. That stuff, it takes care of itself over time. Really, again, I go back to the focus on relationships and people. You go in there, if you're a people person, you make people and learning what your job is about, I think you're going to find success as a leader.
Fantastic. All right. Last question, then we'll hit some quick, fast ones before we get out of here. Ryan already mentioned that he's had some great mentors in his career. So it doesn't have to be a mentor. It just could be, hey, it could be somebody that gave you a coffee this morning. You're thinking of, I don't know, but one person today that you're grateful for. And again, I would give you bonus points if this person could be somebody that might actually listen to this podcast, hear them get a little bit of a shout out. So not necessarily, but again, one person. Stephen, I'll start with you. Give me one person that you're grateful for in education.
Ryan Kelley. He's, if I'm Ted Lasso, he's Coach Beard, or vice versa. But it's probably a joy. It's probably too easy, actually. But I really do think having a relationship, whether it's a principal with a vice principal or a teacher with a neighbor next door, I think that's really important. A big shout out to Ryan. I will throw out there, we talk about developing leaders. So I think part of the reason I'm in this role is I had a former director before me, Truman Grenham, and an AD, Dan O'Brien, who both recognized potential in me when I was principal. So certainly a big shout out to them for, because there were conversations saying, Steve, you should consider this at some point, or I can see you being a director in the future, right? And even times where Truman might have shown me peeked behind the curtain, show me a little bit of his work and how to do something, right? So I realize now that was all
Nice.
part of grooming me for this role. And I think we need to do that in whatever role that we're in.
Great. All right, Ryan.
Steve took my answer. I was going to say Steve Perchard as well. I just hope that everybody, whether it is like it is a principal and a vice principal, you find someone like I have a Steve Perchard. I hope they find their Steve Perchards too, because it does make the job way more enjoyable when you have someone, not just that you can run ideas off of, but also someone that can give you some critique and tell you if the way you're doing things is probably not the best way to do them. It really makes the job worth doing. The mentor, I have a couple of mentors, and I could talk a whole lot about all of them. They're longer stories, but my first principal, who passed away in my first year as principal, I came in after her. She was the one I referenced earlier that no idea was ever too big. She would say, you just do what you got to do, and I'm going to pull away everything that's possible that's going to be in your way to get where you need to go. And I appreciate everything she did. She was wonderful. I also had my former director as well, Paul Rose. He hopefully he'll listen to this podcast, but he is retired, so he may not. But he was fantastic. I remember my first time pitching something to him, and it was almost like a call center. I was like being new as an administrator, and he was my director, so I had a list. If he says no, I'm going to say this. If he says this, I'm going to say this to convince him. And I remember asking him, this is what I want to do. And he was like, no, I think it's a great idea. You're going to go somewhere with that. So I do think as a mentor, you need to encourage your people, and great results come from that.
No doubt you guys are fulfilling that role for somebody else. So I appreciate that. All right. 3 quick fast hitter questions and we'll get you guys out of here. Let's start with, you've already kind of shared Adam Grant, Ted Lasso, but anything else that you're reading and or listening to professionally right now? Stephen, what's on your bookshelf or your phone or whatever you listen to? What are you going to give us?
Professional, I'm just into all kinds of podcasts at the moment. Adam
Give us
Grant's
one.
big one. Malcolm Gladwell's another big one. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, and those are 2 of mine. And what I like about those is they're not specifically education, but of course the applications are pretty evident. So I like to get away from specifically education stuff when I'm trying to learn. Just gives me a little different perspective. So
Yeah, and it helps too, because you pull in other ideas, and I think there's
that's
something
right.
for that.
Ryan, what do you got?
Professionally, I'm reading Harnessing the Science of Learning by Nathaniel Swain out of the Australian system. That's been a really good piece of literature so far. But for me, it's not just about professional and personal lines really blur. My wife is also an administrator, so our conversations go that way. But even for the things I read, I'm currently actually listening to Nate Bargatze, quite a funny comedian, his new book called Big Dumb Lies.
Right.
So I like to mix and match for both. It does keep the work that we do light when I do have something humorous or with humility in it.
I'm a big Nate Bargatze fan. I got to see him live a couple years ago. That was a good deal. All right. Just for fun. Now we're not even trying to learn at this point. We're just actually sitting because we've had a long day, and sometimes our brain just needs something that we do not have to spend time processing. What do you got just for fun? Ryan, I'll start with you. You started us a Bargatze, but like, what else? Give me something. And you know what? The trashier, the better. I would say this.
We're just about to get schools up and running. So this is probably one of our busiest times of the school year, getting all our jobs filled. It really, right now, it is the listening to while I'm doing other things. So if I'm mowing the lawn, it is listening to the Nate Bargatze or something. That is what I'm doing right now. Steve saw it was supposed to be the fun one. You're the
All right,
conversational.
Steve, you got to do better than that, though. Like, you got to give us something.
Yeah, I'll go. It's about as trashy as you can get. Netflix recently uploaded the WWE canon. So I've been watching like old wrestling documentaries and old wrestling
Okay.
matches, and I shouldn't admit that, but
No.
that's my total mindless place right now.
Yes. And so I will connect you with, so one of my good friends, superintendent in West Vancouver, Chris Kennedy, is a huge wrestling fan. So he will often send me wrestling little tidbits. And because of that, I mean, I wasn't a big wrestling guy, but like those old documentaries of this is wild that they were able to do what they did was pretty good. So I'll join you with that. So that those are good releases. All right. This is going to be a tough one for you, but also one that people are probably curious about. So thinking about the specific communities where you live, and again, I haven't explored hardly any of your wonderful province. And I also found out this, and now I'll ask you this question. What percentage of Canadians do you think have ever been to either lived or been to Newfoundland? I looked this up because I was curious when I was there. What percentage of Canadians do you think have ever been or lived in your province?
I'm going to say 20% as a wild guess.
Yeah,
I'm going to
Ryan,
say
what do you got?
10.
Pardon me?
10.
11%.
Wow.
Yeah, 11%. But I mean, people say, yeah, we really want to get there. I was talking to somebody in BC. They say, man, I really want to get there. But they said it's way more expensive to go to Newfoundland than it is to go to Europe. So nothing you can do about that. But let's say someone says, you know what, I got to get there. And they're in your community, Stephen, give me not the obvious. What should they do? They got a couple days. What should they do in those 2 days?
If you're in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, which is where I live, I think a walk around the Glenmillion Pond, followed by a ride on the Mill Whistle Express, which is a cute little train that drives around Corner Brook. It's a short little 5-minute run. And I'd follow that up with a craft beer on a patio somewhere. Can I say craft beer on the show? Is that
You
allowed?
absolutely can. All right, Ryan, you got to beat that.
Yeah. So I always said I'm in the most beautiful place in Newfoundland. I'm from a very small town. I currently live in a very small town of only about 650 people. It is beautiful. It's a gem. If I was coming to this region anywhere in central or western, I would make my way to Kings Point. We have, I see a whale sitting on my patio every day. Steve and I joke all the time that we grew up on stages, just different ones. Steve is an actor. I grew up on a wharf, and in Newfoundland, Labrador, a wharf is called a stage. So that is where we hang out. That is where we have a lot of our fun. And like I said, you get to see whales every day and see a whole lot of wildlife. So getting in a boat is absolutely crucial when you come to Kings Point.
I imagine. Yeah, no, I was doing a PD session last week in Powell River, BC, and overlooking the bay there. And both days we looked out at about 3:00 and there was a humpback putting on a little show. Like I don't get that in Saskatchewan. I can tell you right now. Yes. And we did get some whales, but just to be able to see them like that and not take it for granted, realize, man, this is pretty special stuff. Anyway, you guys have been tremendous today, and I'm so glad we were able to do this and kind of hearing a little bit more of, kind of all things Newfoundland education, the Ted Lasso vibe that you're really working on. I think people really resonate with that. Just thanks you guys so much for your time today, and loved learning from you.
Real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it, sir.